right. So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in across the continent for another very exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. Some of you are familiar faces. Some of you are new to us today. And so if this is your first time joining us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world with the coolest scientists and explorers on planet Earth. And in particular, you are joining us on a very exciting day because we are day 2 of 5 in our epic Ocean Week series. Now, we are doing programs with people from all over the world, but in particular, you are smack dab in the middle of Ocean Week Canada. So this is hundreds of events happening coast to coast to coast, live and virtually. We have partnered with them for years and the amazing team behind them at the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition. I really encourage you, whether you're Canadian, American, or wherever else you're joining from, there's a lot on the go to learn right there, and I can't encourage you enough to check it out. Now, when we were building up the series, Diz, who runs the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, said to me, Jesse, we need to find the best all-star, coolest people on planet Earth to come in. And I was like, man, we've got some people for you. So yesterday, we partnered with Justine Hudson to talk about beluga whales. Our Wednesday, Thursday, Friday shows are equally cool, and I encourage your teachers to check them out. But right now, we are back live with Eugenie Jacobsen. She's joining us live in St. John's, Newfoundland, on the other side of the coast of the province that I'm on, to talk to us today about her Arctic adventure. She has been up to the Arctic many times on Canada's only research icebreaker. We're going to learn a little bit about her journeys up there, and particularly, we're going to dive in on a really cool, special kind of creature today, too. So, without further ado, actually, really quick, a housekeeping note. We have a Kahoot today. I almost forgot to say we have a little 4-question quiz between our talk and Q&A, so please do feel free to bring that up in a separate tab. I'll share that in our chats in just a second. But now, without further ado, I'm going to turn you over to Eugenie. Thank you so much for joining us again, and welcome back to the broadcast.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me again, Jesse. This is so awesome, and I love to see that we have so many students here today. It's great.
300 plus kids from, I think, 4 provinces, 2 states, Nicaragua, like all over the place, which is pretty exciting. And I mean, it's a testament to you. You are one of the very few people I've ever run across in this broadcast that has an equal amount of energy to me, because you just love what you do. And it's, we're going to share a little bit about that over the next 20-25 minutes.
Okay, well, I will take that as a big compliment because you have great energy. Okay, so I'm going to present my screen. Okay.
And you are...
How does that look?
That's perfect. If you just want to drag that little banner, perfect. You are good to go.
Okay. All right. So today on this Arctic Ocean adventure, we're going to be talking about one of my projects, which is our jellyfish taking over the Arctic. Okay. Okay. It's not working. There we go.
It wants to work. It's thinking about it. It's half the fun.
It's thinking.
It worked in our test mere minutes ago. And then when we go live, it wants to give us some trouble. There we are. Perfect.
Okay, so my name is Eugenie Jacobsen. As Jesse said, he kind of gave away all the good points there at the beginning, but that's okay. So I'm a PhD student studying fish and jellyfish ecology in the Canadian Arctic. I'm also a science communicator, so I love to talk about science. So this is great for me to do today. And I love cold places. Of course, if you study the Arctic, you must have a love and appreciation for being cold and well-dressed, and I do. So before we talk about my projects, I thought we would just sort of orient ourselves into where I am today and where we are, which is, if this works. So I'm located in Canada, like we said, and specifically on the east coast of Canada in a place called St. John's, Newfoundland. So studying in St. John's, Newfoundland has been great because it's very cold here and it's very under the influence of the Canadian Arctic because of something called the Labrador Current that brings a lot of cold air and then creates these very sort of wintry conditions for us. And a lot of times we spend a lot of time shoveling snow, which is great. But for me, also moving to St. John's, Newfoundland allowed me to have more access to the Canadian Arctic. And so that was the reason that I decided to come here. And so where is the Canadian Arctic and where is the Arctic in general? So what some might not know is, so if you were to look at the globe, what is on the top is the Arctic and what is below is Antarctica. And in this image here, Canada actually has a big part of the Arctic Ocean. And it's included in all of these different archipelagos, or all of these different series of islands, as well as Baffin Bay and the Beaufort Sea. And we have so many different dynamic species that live in all of these different areas. And so on a map, we can see that there is a lot of course, ice in the Arctic. And there's something called this multi-year sea ice. So this is, we're looking at the top down of the planet. And we can see that big white sheet there, and that is multi-year sea ice, which is ice that does not melt in the summertime. So, in the summer and you're having a drink outside and your ice cubes, they melt a lot faster. Well, in this case, it's a bit different because they just won't melt. So multi-year sea ice is really difficult to sample. It's difficult to get to. And so we need to also have a way of being able to study these environments. And so one of the questions that you might ask is, how do we actually get to the Arctic? And whether it be to the multi-year sea ice regions, or maybe it's just to go to maybe north of Baffin Bay, where there's maybe less sea ice and maybe more belugas, like Jesse was saying. So how do we get there? And lucky for us in Canada, we have the CCGS Amundsen, which is a Canadian Coast Guard research vessel. And this is such a cool hybrid vessel. It normally lives in Quebec City, which is another province here in Canada. And it does a lot of ice-breaking operations in the winter months. So basically just stays near all of the harbors, and it creates these little roads or these paths for other ships to come through, because of the hull sort of breaks the ice and allows for passage of other ships. But in the summertime, it has this, I call it, it's like its nightlife job. Its other job that it does is it gets fit as a research vessel. And so a lot of scientists can go on board and actually travel to the Arctic to sample all of the different species and habitats. Oh, we're going to move to the next one. Okay. Now, this talk is not about the Amundsen, but I wanted to just talk about some of the cool things to highlight, because I think it's been one of my favorite places to work. So on the ship, we have 40 scientists and we have 40 Coast Guard crew members. And the ship itself can travel to the Arctic and be there for 5 months at a time, which is quite astounding. Now, I've only done like 2 months in a year, and that was a lot of time at sea for me. But some people, the ship itself will be at sea for 5 months. Now, this is another cool feature of the Amundsen, which is that there is a helicopter on board. Now, this helicopter, sometimes we use it for science. Like in one case, I got to go on the helicopter to go look at a polar bear site. And then I also, most of the times the helicopters, they're used for their sort of ice, I don't remember how you would say it, your sea ice observation. So sometimes what we would do is we would send the helicopter off into the distance to see where there might be less sea ice that might make for an easier pass of the ship. And of course, the Coast Guard vessels are also search and rescue. So in certain times where we might get a search and rescue call, that meant that we could use the helicopter to go to that person or to that place, or help the nearby communities that are in the Arctic. Now, a few other cool things is that there's a barge on board. There's also 2 other Zodiacs, so small boats, as well as 22 laboratories to do all kinds of science experiments. And in total, we can do about 65 scientific operations. So we can put 65 things overboard to learn about all sorts of things about the life in the Arctic. Now, some of the things that we in our group we do is we look at marine ecology. And so we answer questions like, where are the fish? Why are they there? And what challenges are they facing? So maybe with climate change. And so we have different tools that allow us to answer all of those different questions. And so the first one that we use is we have something called a mid-water trawl. Now that helps us answer the question, well, what is down there? What are the fish? So if we go to a new place and we think, okay, what could be living here. Maybe it's along the shelf. Maybe it's off of this glacier, or maybe it's just a new place and we want to see how it's changed in the past. So we can use this midwater trawl that goes down to the twilight zone of the ocean, which is the ocean where you have very, very little light. And so this is kind of like the samples that we might get. So little fish, little amphipods, and not too much in terms of the critters, but very cool trawl. Now we also have what's called a benthic trawl, which is a very small trawl with a little wheel. And we can take small samples of sort of the fauna that live on the seafloor. So sometimes that might be shrimp. It could be benthic fish, so fish that live on the seafloor. Sometimes it's also rocks, and sometimes it's also a lot of mud. In those cases, then that's not it's quite unfortunate for us, but it gives us an idea about all of those different communities of fish that are living on the seafloor. Another net that we use is this ichthyoplankton net. You say that 3 times, ichthyoplankton, really hard to say. So we use what's called this, it's a Tucker net, and it can show us where the small baby fish are. So where are fish spawning, and what might be impacting their survival as well. So that's a good way of just knowing how it might influence the whole adult populations too. Now this is a net that is quite difficult to deploy. It's actually 9 nets in one, and it can tell us the different food that's in the water column. And so when I say food, I mean like there's these little insects of the sea. They're called copepods. And these copepods, they can live at different parts of the water column. Mostly they're at the surface of the ocean or where there's light. And so this net is one of those nets that can tell us how are their food moving, or how are these insects moving down into the water column as the day goes on, and are they escaping predators? Are they escaping light? And so this gives us an idea of what the fish might be eating, or how productive, we might say, is the ecosystem. And then we also use something called, it's sort of this passive data collection, meaning that wherever the ship goes, we're collecting data. So we don't have to put anything over the water. We don't have to take anything out of the water. We can use something called or acoustics or hydroacoustics, or if you've ever gone fishing with your parents. I know that I used to when I was a kid, and we would have a depth sounder. I call these a fancy fish finder. So basically everywhere that you can see those kind of green moving specks, those would be your fish, or maybe your zooplankton. And so we can look at this and sort of make guesses about what it could be based off of what we're catching in those nets. Now, this has nothing to do with my research, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it, because I think it's very cool, and it's one of it's one of the most awe moments of working on the Amundsen, which is we do have underwater cameras. We have baited cameras that some teams use, and we also on the ship, other teams use what's called the remotely operated vehicle, which is an ROV, which essentially is like a little robot. I mean, it is a little robot that you send down into the water that has little arms, and it can collect certain samples, and then it can drive away, and it's all piloted by people that are sitting nice and cozy inside of the ship. And so with that, we've been able to see different communities also. So this is some of the footage that we got from the ROV. So we can see here, I'm just going to, hopefully this video is going to play. There we go. So this is the ROV sampling. This is the ROV collecting an old instrument that fell into the water. But what we're getting are these really clear images that we wouldn't normally be able to get. And we're getting to see all of these animals in their natural environment. So these are just part of those operations that allow us to answer, again, those questions about marine ecology. And so when we're 40 scientists on the boat, we can all put our heads together and come up with answers for the questions that we're asking. Okay, so now what about jellyfish, and where does that come in? Because that was a big part of my talk. And so something that's been going on in the Arctic is that we've been seeing more and more jellyfish in our trawls. And so this was a mid-water trawl. So if you remember the one that was in the twilight zone, and we can see all of that orange goop is a jellyfish. So we probably went through a big bloom of jellyfish. And so this kind of sparked my questions as to, well, how long have jellyfish been here? What are they doing? Do they have a job in the ecosystem? Is this a problem? Is this happening elsewhere in the world? So really, what does this mean? Because we don't really know at this point, because we never really sampled jellyfish, because they're really difficult to sample, as you can see in that image. And it turns out that the first thing when I look into it is that jellyfish have been increasing in the world. And so this was earlier this year, we saw these types of Vellela, which are these types of jellyfish that swarmed the beaches. This was in Spain. And I'm sure in other places, and I know like in British Columbia, where I'm originally from, there's a lot more jellyfish blooms that are happening there. And so this is becoming quite an issue, and it's having a lot of impacts on ecosystems. And so ultimately, jellyfish are doing better and better. And that's because of climate change, because they do better in warmer waters, because they can outcompete fish. They don't need the same food that other fish might need. They have a lot of oxygen in their tissue, so they can live in these oxygen minimum zones, a lot of like dead zones in the ocean. So they're just kind of a better competitor in a way, but they might not have the same input into these food webs, for example. So this brings me to the first quiz that I had, and this is something I had to sort of do to myself when I was first starting to learn about jellyfish. So Jesse, I don't know how this is going to work, but I have some pictures, and then I guess we'll monitor the chat and see.
Yeah, I'll do that. And I can also bring in our classes. So Gems Chicago, class 3-2, I can bring you in live for this. We can find out if you think it's a jellyfish or not. But Eugenie, take us away and we'll start with number 1.
Okay, so while I'm doing this, you can just imagine that there's a nice like game show song going like, okay, is it a jellyfish? Okay, what do we think? Is it a jellyfish?
Gems, I'm going to come to you guys live. If you want to flick on your mic, let's see. What do we think? I think, you think yes? I think
yes. Okay, I think yes. Okay. Yeah, good work, everybody. Yes, that is a jellyfish. That's one of the ones that we've caught, and this is one of my favorite ones. I love that one. Okay, now moving on. Is this a jellyfish?
Yes.
No. I don't think so. I say no. I actually don't know the answers to this either, but I would say no looking at that. That's pretty weird.
Okay, I'm curious. For those of you that said no, can someone maybe explain why they think it's a no?
It's obviously yes.
Una.
Because I know it looks like lobs, but they're perfect stripes that look exactly identical.
Okay, so two things that are really identical. They're too perfect. Class 3-2 will come to you for the next one right after this. I think they're an odd shape for a jellyfish. I've never seen a jellyfish that shape before, so that's kind of neat. Okay, what do we think, Eugenie?
Oh, okay. So here's the answer. The answer is they are not a jellyfish. Okay. Ooh, okay. So we'll get back to that one in a little bit, but I want to keep moving on here, and I'll explain why that is not a jellyfish in a little bit. Okay, so what about this one? Is it a jellyfish?
All right, 3-2s with Miss V. If you want to flick on your mic camera again, I saw you pop in for a second there. We'll see what you think. YouTubers, you can chime in the chat anytime as well. But Mrs. V, if you guys want to say hi, you can let us know what you think. That's a really odd looking thing. And then our Gem. Oh,
I just want to say there was a hint about this one a couple slides before. If you notice, it kind of looks familiar.
Okay, Gems, what do you think? You can unmute too. You can always keep your mics on, everybody. I promise. Makes it easier. What do we think? Unmute. Let us know.
Yes.
Yes.
Jellyfish, though.
A red jellyfish. Okay. Yeah, I like that.
Well, all right. Well, I think that was a pretty, yes, it's weird, but it is a jellyfish. And that was the one that we saw that was in the cooler right before. Okay, now this one, is this a jellyfish?
All right, YouTubers, you guys feel free to chime in as well. Gems, what do we think?
No, that's a fish.
That's a fish. It's a fish, Eugenie. You're being ridiculous. It's such a fish.
But does everyone see the jelly though? Because I'm seeing a lot of jelly in this fish.
Yeah, he's got a jelly top and a jelly bottom, but he's not a jellyfish, is he? Are you gonna blow our minds? What do we think? Let's
I
see.
think, okay, drum roll. This one I was trying to stump everybody, but I think it was tricky, but no, it's not a jellyfish. And Jesse, you're right. You're right, of course.
Yay!
Um,
I'm a big
I
kid
thought I
now.
could maybe get people with that. Okay, so one of the things is that jellyfish, they are zooplankton, which means that they are drifters, not fish. So jellyfish can't be fish, which is a little bit weird considering that jellyfish and fish means that a fish could be a jelly, just like the one I just showed you, but that is not the case. And so, what about this one? Now, this was a weird one, and I actually had to ask a researcher in the UK about this, and I had to say, listen, is this a jellyfish? Because it's a drifter, it's a zooplankton. It's something called an arrowworm, and these are super weird in the water. They kind of move around like a little inchworm, but they go really, really fast. And arrowworms are zooplankton because they do drift along in the water, but because they actually don't have as much of what's called water content. So water content, it turns out, has a lot more to do with how we classify different jellyfish. So if this is all of the zooplankton in the world, what we would see here is that we have non-gelatinous, meaning that they don't have a lot of water in their tissues. They have about less than 70% of their water content. So we might also have semi-gelatinous, which now you can actually see in this image where the arrowworm is. So they have a water content of about 70 to 95%. So that means they're semi-gelatinous. So actually, I would have accepted both answers, come to think of it, because they do have, they're sort of gelatinous, but they're not jellyfish, but they're semi. So anyways, I'll give points for that one too. But then we have gelatinous species that are almost entirely composed of seawater. And so when we put it all together, jellyfish are zooplankton, meaning they're drifters with a lot of water. And so it's almost like you would have your floating jello in the water. Then you could say, I guess that would be a jellyfish, although it does need to be living. So, but essentially that's what it is. Okay, now the different groups that we have, and this is, you don't have to pay attention to the words necessarily. These are just all of the different families that we have. And these are sort of the three, what's called phylums. So that's how we classify organisms in this whole taxonomic tree of life. So we have scyphozoans, which these ones are these helmet jellyfish on the top left-hand corner. We have box jellyfish, which sometimes you hear about that in Australia. We have this immortal jellyfish, which is this hydrozoa, which is also on the left-hand side, that can live forever, which is a whole other topic for another day. We have comb jellyfish that have tentacles and some that don't. We have salps that form these big chains in the water. We have sea squirts that sit on the seafloor. And so all of these are considered jellyfish, and because of their high water content. Now, so we know that they have a lot of seawater, but some people ask, well, do they even have other proteins, or what do they even have? Well, they have a little bit amount of protein, they have a little bit amount of fats, and they have a little bit amount of carbohydrates. So if you were to go to the grocery store and look at a jellyfish and the backhand side and see all the different nutrients in them, they really wouldn't have a lot because mostly it's just water. But it turns out that they are important food sources for animals like sea turtles and sunfish. If anyone has ever seen a sunfish before, they are very, very fascinating creatures. And so sea turtles have been the predators that we have known that have been eating jellyfish all this time. And they have these different adaptations. So for those of you, this is a fun fact. So leatherback sea turtles, they have almost this like cartilage sort of razors that are inside of their throat that allow them to eat so many jellyfish in one sitting, because you need to eat a lot to get enough energy from them, enough nutrients from them. And then they have those little prongs that prevent them from being pushed back out of their throats, which sounds pretty gruesome, but it's pretty cool. But okay, now we've kind of gone a little bit too far here. So how does this all come back to the Arctic? Because the last time I checked, we don't have sea turtles in the Arctic. So what is happening now with jellyfish being more common in the world, and we don't have sea turtles in the Arctic? So now do we just have a bunch of jellyfish that are just hanging around? So this brings me to my question that I am researching in my PhD, which is, are jellyfish in Arctic food webs? And specifically, are they being consumed or eaten by Arctic cod, which is one of my study fish? So what I did to answer this question was I did stomach sampling. So I took out the stomachs of each one of the fish, and then I opened it up, and then I counted all of the different what's called prey items or food that's in each of the different stomachs. And so I had a sort of a relative number, but at no point did I find jellyfish. So I kind of thought, that's really weird, because I think that they are eating them, because they must be, someone must be. But the fact that then I couldn't see it, I thought that that was quite interesting. So then what I ended up doing is I use something called DNA metabarcoding, or, broadly speaking, I use genetics. So I took all of the goop that was in the stomach, and I pulled out all of the DNA of that, and then I found they had these meta barcodes. So I was trying to see if jellyfish had left traces inside of their stomachs. Now, I think I might have lost some people when I started talking about DNA and genetics, but basically all you need to know is that every living thing has a barcode, or everyone is unique in some way, and we all shed DNA. And so for jellyfish shedding DNA, they can leave, like I said, those traces within the stomach contents, and then it would allow me to say, well, this jellyfish was found in this stomach, and this one was found in this stomach, and it gives me a better picture about what they're eating. And so sure enough, this is brand new results that I have, which is that jellyfish are being eaten by fish, which is very astounding. And with any scientific sort of discovery or thought, it helps, to answer one question, but then you just open up a whole door of so many more questions. So that's exactly what this did. And I started asking other questions like, well, what does this tell us? And it tells us that jellyfish are invisible, and I missed them when I was looking at their stomachs. And also, it brings more questions about, well, have they always been eating jellyfish, and what would be, the issues if they were eating more and more jellyfish? And so if yes, maybe they have been eating them this whole time, and maybe there's less impact. Maybe they're so used to it. Maybe they are really good at consuming a lot of them, just like sea turtles, and then they can still eat their other foods. But if not, if now they're eating more jellyfish and they're filling up on all of these lower nutritious foods, well, maybe that might have more of an impact. And so let's think about this in a different way. This is a good Canadian show right now. So my favorite chips are the Ruffles all dressed chips. That's a Canadian chip, and I love them. So it kind of would be like if fish were eating more of these chips every day. So if you fill up on all of these chips before dinner, you're not going to want to eat the rest of your dinner. And it's the same thing with that's so funny. That makes me laugh. Okay. It's the same thing with Arctic cod, for example. If they eat so much jellyfish, well, what might that happen? And then they won't have an appetite to eat other of their more nutritious foods, like their broccolis or their copepods, those insects that I was talking about before. And so that might have more impacts, like it would make these fish gradually be smaller and maybe less fit. And then for all of the predators that eat the jellyfish, well, then that would mean they would have less high energy food. So if no one is eating broccoli, then no one is getting the benefits of broccoli. But if everyone is eating chips, then everyone is sort of suffering the consequences of eating chips for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so that's one of the sort of the concerns about jellyfish increasing in the Arctic. And so this has taught me that I have way more questions than I do have answers. And so what I'm now doing is I'm still sampling on the Canadian Coast Guard vessel and using these new techniques like DNA metabarcoding to help better understand all of these different relationships. And luckily we have these new techniques, and it is very hopeful because we can answer questions, and maybe it's not going to be that bad. So it could actually be maybe a better a shift, but we won't know until we have more answers, which is a good thing to say in science. So I'll leave you with stay tuned.
Stay tuned, and we'll have to catch you in a year or so and find out if you've learned a little bit more. But thank you so much for the deep dive into getting up to the Arctic, seeing what it's like, some really cool jellyfish stuff, and some stellar work by our Gem Chicago crew on nailing which is a jellyfish and what is not. Now, before we dive into our Q&A with all you classes, we are going to start with our Kahoot. So another quiz for you just to test your understanding, have some fun. And what you win for this quiz is Eugenie and I's everlasting respect. So Eugenie, if you want to come out of screen share so you can see us again, have a bit of a conversation, feel free to do that. I'm going to pull up our game. And so for those who are new to Kahoot, the faster you answer, the more points you get. And so be quick on the trigger finger, everybody. I think we've got a few whole classes playing, and then we'll dive in with our nice Q&A. So we're going to begin with this. Get us started. You can join in after we've gotten started, and let's see how it all goes together. All right. Dun, 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 dun. And then we're coming for questions. So Gems, you guys are going to be our first class. Mrs. V, you can share in the chat. If you can't get devices working, and YouTubers, we'd love to hear from you as well. So the Arctic has times where the sun never sets or rises during the day. Is this true or false? Seems kind of crazy. I don't know. Yes,
Seems
to the sun.
to me.
It does. I've never experienced this in person, and it's one of the things I most want to see on planet Earth is to be like the midnight sun or the opposite when you're like absolute polar darkness. So let's get those answers in. The answer is yes, true. All of you got this. So that's what defines the Arctic or Antarctic is beyond that point. There are times at which the sun never rises or sets during the year, which is super, super weird. So, Question 2. Okay. You've been on board the Canada's only research icebreaker. What's it called? Let's see. What do we got? The Nautilus, the Falkor, the Amundsen, or the Attenborough. Now, these are all ships. These are all ships that we've actually featured before on our broadcast. Does anyone have a sense of which one Eugenie has been aboard? We're going to be doing broadcasts live from this ship next in 2 weeks for the first time ever, which we're very excited about. Ooh, the Amundsen is correct. How many times have you been on it?
6. This will be my 7th. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Lucky you. I give my left arm to be on board that ship. There's a weird expression for you kids. All right. Jellyfish are most related to what? We did not cover this, but I always like to hear the test. Are they closest to fish, coral, rays, or starfish? What do we think? This is a weird answer.
Yeah.
Let's see. Eugenie, have you worked on the close relatives of these before? Or has it just been jellyfish before?
The close relatives, like in my research, have I? Yeah. At one time, I looked at starfish when I was doing my undergrad. It's awesome.
Very cool. Well, coral is our correct answer. Proud Penguin nailed that one. It's really weird. We've covered this before. They're sort of like upside down anchored jellyfish to the bottom, but they're in the same family with those stingers. So, okay, jellyfish are extremely rare in the Arctic. True or false? Now, we talked about them being in stomachs. We've done programs in the Arctic with them before. We've done programs in the Antarctic with them before. So maybe they're not quite as abundant as in this picture, but there are jellyfish. So false is our correct answer. We're getting more and more of them. The more we trawl, the more we find. Eugenie, you're not the only scientist who's come on and talked about this. It's really interesting to see the shifting world of what creatures go where as the climate shifts around us. So Nimble Yeti is second, Mighty Seal's third, and first for all the marbles before we head to our Gems crew for a question. Proud Penguin, thank you so much. If you are any of these folks, let us know who you are in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. But we're going to dive in with questions. So Gems Chicago, you're going to be our first one. Come on in, unmute your mic, and take us away with question number 1. Hey, guys, welcome in. Hi. I know you're there, but do you have any questions for Eugenie? Let's see.
All right, friends. Raise your hand if you have a question. We'll start with Jacob.
Okay. Why does the ice not melt?
Ooh.
Why does the ice not melt? Okay. That's a great question. So you're talking about the multi-year sea ice. Well, for one, the Arctic is very, very cold. And so it's the same thing. If you were to put your ice cube in the freezer, well, it's not going to melt. But if you put it in the fridge, it's going to melt. So for one is that the temperatures are cold enough in the wintertime and in the summertime so that they stay cold. And that's the main reason. It's just that it's cold enough. But now with climate change, which is now making it warmer, it's kind of like now we're putting this ice cube into the fridge. And so it's not able to keep cold for longer. So that's a great question. So it's just about the cold.
It is. And I'll encourage our classes too, if you're not near the Arctic, if you don't find yourself up there, if you ever go to like a mountain range, maybe if you're in, we got a lot of Americans today, if you're in Colorado, in the middle of the summer, the tops of those mountains are covered in snow and ice because it's cold enough up there that ice never melts. And we don't want that to melt. It's very important that we try and do everything we can to avoid that ice from melting because it really does underpin a lot of how we live on this planet. So I love this question. Thanks, Chicago. Mrs. V, unmute your mic. Welcome in. How you doing? Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
All right, we do have a question from Evelyn. Evelyn,
Hi,
what was
Evelyn.
your question?
Why do jellyfish sting?
Ooh, that's a great question. So jellyfish, so the stinging ones are part of phylum Cnidaria. So they have tentacles. It's sort of that are like, well, the tentacles have what's called nematocysts, which are their stinging cells, and they basically harpoon their prey and they inject them with the toxin. And so, for mostly, it's a predatory thing. So it's about how they catch their food. And then for those that are swimmers, well, it's just a little unpleasant, isn't it, when you get stung by a jellyfish? But they're not going to eat you. They're just there trying to do their thing and trying to catch prey.
So, I mean, I always like it to kids like this. Why do you eat? Right? You eat because you need to live. You eat with your mouth. You got to put food in there. Same with jellyfish. That's just how they happen to capture their food. And it's really, really cool. I really encourage you, look up those nematocysts, and they're like super engineered harpoon barbs. Like they're really, really cool. And just a fascinating way of catching prey. So that's a great question, guys. We are going to come back to both of you in just a second for another round. Eugenie, if our question from online, if someone wants to be you, what would they do? What would you recommend to kids in school that want to become like an Arctic cool biologist?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So I think don't be me, be you is the first thing that I would say. So follow what you want to do first and foremost, of course, and what you are passionate about. That is the only way that I've ended up in this position that I'm in today, is just following all the cool projects and cool opportunities that have come up. But I guess to answer, if you want to get into marine science and be more involved in the Arctic and those kinds of things, then I would say, so if you're a high school student, then maybe you can, maybe start like looking in like conservation or start working around in your community, get outside, find an appreciation for nature. Well, get outside as much as you can and find a love for it, of course. And then typically, like if you have to do an undergraduate degree in biology or maybe marine biology or ecology, and then you can sort of continue on and do like internships and all sorts of things. But generally, my advice is always to find the cool projects. And of course, like cool is very subjective, but that's exactly the point, because what's cool to you will be the thing that like brings you forward. So yeah, find the cool project.
Answer. And I always like to highlight for kids, is we've got some grade 2s and 3s today. And the idea of doing 9 years of school and then 4 years of school and then 4 years of school is like crazy. You can't even think about it. But at the end of that, you end up really young, getting to work with the coolest people on planet Earth that are nerdy about the exact same things that you are. You get to play for work. You get to fly up to the Arctic and go catch jellyfish and test their DNA and do amazing things and be as happy as Eugenie is. So it's not for everybody, but if it is for you, I know it sounds a little daunting, but it's very, very well worthwhile. So great question, YouTubers. We're going to do another round with our live classes. Gems, come on back in and take us away. And we're coming to you, Mrs. V, in just a second. Hey, guys.
I'm going to do some Myra.
Hey, Myra.
How long do jellyfish live for?
Ooh.
How long do you live for?
Okay, well, that's a great question. I don't know if you caught it in my presentation, but there is a jellyfish called the immortal jellyfish that they say can live forever. So there's a big like spectrum. So some can live for like 2 years and others can live for maybe like decades. But that's assuming that they're not being eaten by a sea turtle or something like that. So I think it's about like if a moon jellyfish, which most people have maybe seen a moon jellyfish if they've had the chance to go to the aquarium. I think moon jellyfish are about 2 years, 2 or 3 years. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's about 2 years. Yeah. So fairly short-lived.
Yeah, it's amazing actually some of the creatures that are short-lived. The one that weirded me out the most is octopus. So like the biggest octopus in the world lived like 3 years, which is crazy, but they're so smart and fascinating and large, and you'd think they'd live like 80, 100 years, and they don't. They're one of the shortest lived creatures. So I love that your head's at longevity for animals. I encourage all our classes, look up the Greenland shark too for a little bit of a surprise in the other direction. Very, very cool. Mrs. V's class, we're going to come to you next. I want to encourage all our classes, check out all our stuff on YouTube. All our programs are going there, including this one. You can share with your family and friends. And if you're keen on the rest of our Ocean Week Canada series, it's on our channel, oceanweekcan.ca as well. And there's lots more great programs to come all week long. But Mrs. V, come on in with one final query. Take us away. Hey.
Stand up and ask your question.
How are jellyfish related to coral?
Ooh.
That's a great question. So they are in, so I mentioned a couple words, which is, I think I said taxonomic tree. And so they are both part of phylum Cnidaria. So they have, so when we think of corals aren't plants, corals are actually living, and they have little polyps on them. And so those are sort of what's related, or what you can look at that sort of looks like a jellyfish. And the other part too is sometimes a species, maybe it lives on the sea floor, but at some point in its life cycle, it maybe swam in the ocean, like as a larvae, and then it settled on the sea floor. So at that time, it looked like a jellyfish. And then when it sits on the sea floor, well, it's still a jellyfish. It's just now it's an adult and it just looks a little bit different. So, so they're both part of this Cnidaria, the stinging cell family. So
it's a really big concept to think about, especially when you're some of our younger classes today. But every living thing on this planet is related, just in the same way that you're related to your brother and sister and cousins. If you go back far enough, everything from like a tree to a fungus to a shark to us are all related. And so it happens that coral are the most related thing to our jellyfish friends. But really, you can pick any organism on this planet and it's related to every other thing in some degree. You are about 60% similar to like a fruit fly, which sounds crazy. And coral, again, and jellyfish are really, really close. Think of them as sort of like upside down versions of one another. One swims along or one gets blown around by the current. One anchors itself to the bottom. I love this query. And in the next 10 years or so, you're going to cover this in varying degrees of difficulty as you go through your schooling. So keep an eye out for that. It's what drew me into science to begin with, is that sort of evolutionary tree. It's very, very cool. Eugenie, time flies when you're having fun. We are nearing the end of the broadcast. Before I bring in our two classes to say a big thank you and farewell, is there any final message you want to leave us with today?
Well, I think I said it. I think if anyone is interested in going into this field, just follow cool projects and be true to yourself and keep asking great questions. And I think as long as we're inquisitive and curious about the world, then we're going in the right direction. So thank you all for your questions today. It was awesome. I always love coming on here. So
no better message than that. And thank you for the kind words. We love having you. Come on back anytime you'd like, especially after 7, 8, 105 times in the ship. More adventures to come in the years to come. So thank you so much. And as you know how we wrap up every broadcast, I'm going to bring in our two classes. So if you want to flick on your microphones, if you're on YouTube and you want to scream and yell and annoy the principal too, you have our permission. But Gems and Mrs. V, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
thank you.